In this training, we're going to go over Google and Bing ads, what's often referred to as pay-per-click or PPC advertising. This is probably the most common marketing channel used by every healthcare provider in the country. It's very nice because it's a bottom of funnel channel. Bottom of funnel means that we can use it for final attribution. Final attribution means it's really easy to navigate the ROI. We can see a click, we can see a call or an inquiry, and we can see a new patient admission or a scheduled assessment or appointment or whatever the case may be. So it allows us a pretty strong look at the ROI of our particular campaigns, which you can't do on almost any channel, right? TV doesn't work that way. Billboards don't work that way. Facebook and TikTok don't work that way. So Google ads and Bing ads are pretty nice from that standpoint. Do want to just reemphasize that what we're not going to get into here is the nitty gritty of this. You do not need to learn how to build Google ads or a Bing campaign from scratch. We don't need to know what an account tree structure is. We don't need to know how to go in and optimize all the different campaigns. We just need to know what the KPIs are, how to set up the data appropriately, how we should be thinking about it strategically from a budgeting standpoint, and how to hold our teams accountable. Even for chief marketing officers, sometimes we have backgrounds in traditional media like TV and radio, or a really large focus on branding and strategy. We don't need to know how to run the PPC campaigns ourselves, but we should understand what the KPIs are, the leading indicators are. And so if you're coming from a more traditional media background, this training is also going to help you in terms of understanding what should be happening with a PPC campaign and strategy, and at least to know that it's working and you're moving in the right direction. The first thing to understand with PPC is because it's great in helping us understand a pretty clear one-to-one linear ROI, which is odd in the marketing world or unique in the marketing world, you have to have really good data. Garbage in, garbage out. If we don't have the right data going into the campaigns, our human teams don't know how to optimize appropriately, and the algorithms on the back end of these platforms themselves won't know how to optimize appropriately. So what has to be in place is what's called conversion tracking through some kind of call tracking or inquiry tracking software. These are things like call tracking metrics or call rail. These are not your VoIP system. They're not your traditional back end call like a Mitel or a Ring Central or a Grasshopper. Like those are not call tracking softwares. Those platforms just allow you to track total call information. So they'll tell you things like the number of missed calls, the number of abandoned calls, how long a call is happening for. That is not a marketing-oriented call tracking software. A marketing-oriented call tracking software, like your call tracking metrics or your call rail, basically, they just use a little code of JavaScript on the back end of the website, and then they allow you to create what are called number pools within the software. And the software knows, and your website knows in general, where a call comes from. Did it come from Facebook, or where they visit the website from is better. So where did they visit the website from? Did they visit it from Facebook? Did they visit from a Google ad? Did they visit from an organic Google search? Did they visit from a different social media channel, whatever the case may be? So your website knows that, and it can feed that into the call tracking software to tell you when an inquiry comes in. And that inquiry could be a chat inquiry, it can be a call inquiry, it can be an online form fill inquiry, and so it can track all of those. On top of that, you can create specific numbers and attach them to things. And so I could say, all right, well, I just want to have a specific number for these billboards, and I want to have a specific number for TV campaigns. Sometimes people get a little crazy with that stuff, and they'll try and do a different number for every single billboard and stuff like that, or a different number for every single ad campaign. That's pretty useless for lots of reasons. On billboards, you just don't get enough calls for it to make sense. People don't call off of billboards most of the time. On a Google ad campaign, we don't really care about the specific keyword or the specific campaign. We're going to see that in the click data and the total conversion data. We don't need a phone number tied to that, and it limits the call pools and some other technical challenges that we don't want. So we don't want to get super granular with our call tracking. We set up a dynamic number pool, and then the software tells us if the call came or the inquiry came from a Google ad versus a Bing ad versus an organic search, whatever the case may be. So just make sure we understand a little bit how this works. It's called dynamic number tracking. And so basically the software on the website takes your main phone number and it replaces them with one of these call tracking numbers. And that's how the system ties it. So you won't have a single number showing up on your website. You'll actually have different numbers showing up all the time. And that's the call tracking software tying the inquiry to a particular channel, which helps out your marketing team. A huge problem that we see when we take over accounts from internal teams or other agencies is either not having call tracking set up at all, which is hugely problematic. How is your team going to know how to optimize campaigns? How's the algorithm going to know how to optimize campaigns? But also we'll see conversions set up as clicks. So you have to set it up as a click if you don't have call tracking software in place. So that's sometimes the issue. But often we go in and there is call tracking software in place, but they're still optimizing for clicks. That's a huge problem because, again, it's all about the quality of the data that we're feeding into the system and feeding to our teams. And so just on average, if we look at click data versus call data, if someone clicks a click to call button on a website or from their mobile phone or whatever, only about 30% of those people actually then complete the call. So 70% of those click to call button clicks are not what we consider to be a real conversion. So you're feeding 70% of data into the system of people who are actually likely to call, which is a problem. We don't want the team or the algorithm using that 70% of the data. And since that's most of the data, it's going to feed mostly bad data back to the system and the team. So we want to get as close to the admission as possible. If you've got a platform like Salesforce is really nice because it has a strong API connections with most call tracking softwares. So we can connect it to the EHR, which will then send admissions data back to the CRM portion, which then sends it back to the call tracking software. And it's all anonymized, so it's HIPAA compliant. And then that can send back to Google and Bing ads and to the team so that we can optimize off of admissions data, which is really valuable for large, scalable, high volume providers. If you're only getting 1 or 2 admissions, a week, if you're a small provider, there's not enough statistical significance there for that to matter. But if you're small, you're probably not using Salesforce anyway. So Salesforce can be really nice, but most of the time, unless you have Salesforce, you're using qualified inquiry data because you can't track that admission back very well most of the time. So you just want to get the qualified inquiry back. And again, qualified inquiries are different than general inquiries. I don't really care if someone called. I care if they were someone that was qualified to come into our program. That's usually interest in the services that we're providing, as well as the ability to pay or have the appropriate insurance, what have you. But again, bottom line, we don't want to use clicks. If that's how it's set up, that's wrong. And then another issue we see with clicks is people set up the conversion tracking poorly. They will set it up for all form fills. A lot of time people will refresh a screen, which then sends another conversion data point to the software, which is wrong. Like you don't want that. Sometimes they'll have a click to call and a call set up as a conversion. So then you're double counting the conversion. You got the conversion for the click, and then you got the conversion for the call, even though it was just one person. And so that feeds bad data into the system. Lots of ways that bad data can be put into the system. You just want to make sure your team knows what they're doing and they're appropriately tracking call data or inquiry data. What is a qualified inquiry? This is really important. So like I mentioned, it is related to, are they looking for your particular services that you offer? And are they able to afford those services based on whatever methods of payment that you accept? We want that data going back into the system because, again, that tells the algorithm, it tells the call team what's working or what's not working. So how do we get a qualified inquiry tagged? Your team can manually tag it, or you can use length of time as a proxy. So let's say that someone calls into you and we know that on average, it takes us 5 minutes to schedule an assessment or determine if someone's appropriate for our level of care or our service line or whatever it is. So we could have the team go and manually say, hey, this was a qualified call. This is what we're looking for. Or we could just say, hey, 5-minute calls are qualified inquiries. And so every time we have a 5-minute call, we're just automatically going to take that. Is there going to be noise in that data? Are you going to have someone that's complaining, or maybe they're trying to get billing information and it takes someone a long time to find it? Yes, absolutely. But that noise is always going to be there, and we're not overly concerned with it, right? 5 to 10% of our tagging may be noise, no matter how we do it. Not a big deal, because it's going to be that same 5 to 10% every month, so it doesn't really skew our decision-making process in any way, shape, or form. I do really focus on, when we're thinking as executives about how to hold the teams accountable for marketing, it's that qualified inquiry. So you notice that qualified is highlighted here. Obviously very intentional. We don't care about every inquiry that comes in. We only care about the qualified inquiries. That helps direct our team to create the campaigns and focus on the right audiences and the right messaging. That gets us patients who are able to come into our program. It doesn't say admission. It doesn't say new patient. That's also really important, as I've talked about a couple of times throughout this training. The marketing team's job is to create as many at-bats as possible for the hitter to hit, right? And so it is the hitter's job to hit the ball. So it's your call team's job, whether that's a front office person or an actual call team, to take the qualified inquiry and convert them into a patient. There are a lot of factors that can go into whether or not the admissions person is able to do that are more or less outside of the marketing team's control. So is the marketing team putting enough balls into play so there are enough at-bats? That's your qualified, right? If there's too many inquiries and not enough qualified, that could be a problem. But if they're providing the qualified inquiries, it's the admissions team's job to convert the admission, and you should be tracking their KPI separately as the number of conversions coming off of qualified inquiries. That does go back to tagging a little bit. As we know, what gets measured gets managed. And so if the call team or the front office person knows that they're being judged in terms of performance on their conversion rate from qualified inquiry to new patient or admission, then they might skew what they tag as qualified, and they might take a qualified call and not tag it because they know that will make their numbers look better. So sometimes it can make more sense just to set a baseline and say, okay, a 1-minute call, a 2-minute call, a 5-minute call, whatever our benchline metric is, that determines a qualified inquiry number or qualified inquiry for us, because that means that people can't game the system as much, but it's up to you in terms of how you want to set it up. So then let's say our qualified inquiry volume is low, or our cost per qualified inquiry is too high, which is a much better metric to look at. We don't really care about the total number of qualified inquiries all the time as much as I care about the cost, and I'll talk about why that is in a little bit here. So what levers can my team pull to change the cost per qualified inquiry? Well, they can change the click-through rate, and the click-through rate is going to depend on audience targeting. Are we targeting the right people with the right message at the right time? So I can change the way that the ads are written. I can change the people that we're putting the ads in front of. I can change the key terms that we're targeting or related to those ads. That's all going to have an effect on the click-through rate. And a better click-through rate gets us a better quality ad score in Google and Bing. And the higher our quality ad score, the cheaper that we'll pay for those clicks. So Google will also tell you that they only charge you per click. It's kind of a lie. I mean, really, these platforms charge you on a CPM, or a cost per 1,000 impressions basis. All they do is they take the total money you spent. So let's say you spent $100 and you got one click. They're going to tell you that your cost per click is $100. If you get 2 clicks, they'll tell you that your cost per click is $50, right? So they're charging you the same amount based on how many impressions that they've shown. And then they're just dividing that total spent by the number of clicks. But Google will tell you that they just charge you for a click, which isn't exactly right. So if your click-through rate is higher, right, then you're going to have a lower cost per click. Now, cost per click is also a function of what keywords you're targeting. So you can target certain keywords that are only $1. You can target keywords that are $60. It can also change based on your match strategy. So a broad match strategy is a cheaper cost per click than an exact match or a phrase match strategy in Google and Bing ads. And so your team can pull those levers as well. There's lots of things for them to be thinking about in those questions. Why is a certain key term more expensive than another? Well, because it's in high demand. There's a lot of people bidding on it. Why are there a lot of people bidding on that term? Because it's a term that works. It's a term that people use in their search to search for your services. And so because there's a lot of competition around that term, Google or other platforms are going to charge more for it. But you might say, hey, we're a smaller provider and we aren't playing with the big boys over here. They can pay $60 a click. We only want to pay $20 a click total. So let's go over the key terms that are still high intent, but maybe not the highest intent. And that's more cost effective for us. Those are things your team can think through. Again, with the exact match and the broad match, we'll talk a little bit more about later. But exact match, Google charges you through the nose for because it says, okay, I'm only going to use this particular term. Whereas broad match says, okay, we're going to use this term and then kind of related terms around it. And so it charges you less. And each strategy can be effective for different reasons, which we'll go into in another slide. Then there's the landing page conversion rate. So our PPC specialist needs to talk with our web developer, needs to talk with our graphic designer, needs to talk with the content writer. And there are a lot of conversion rate optimizations that can be performed on a landing page. And so that's another lever that they can pull to try and increase the number of people that hit the page and then make an inquiry. Hopefully you're a Hunger Games fan. I'm a big fan of those books. My daughter got me onto them. They say, may the odds be ever in your favor. This is actually really important when we think about data for PPC, because what we need statistical significance. Otherwise, the data is meaningless. So we'll take a really easy example on this one. Let's say that I've got two key terms that we're targeting. I got key term A and key term B. Now, for key term A, I get one call. And then for key term B, I get one call. Well, which of these key terms should I be optimizing for? I have no idea, right? Doesn't tell me anything. I don't have any data there. Even if I've got two here in key term A and one here in key term B, do 3 data points really tell me anything? Like, no, there's just a lot of random noise in that. Now, let's say that I got 100 calls, and out of those 100 calls, 80 calls went to key term A and 20 calls went to key term B. Now, which of these campaigns should I be optimizing towards? I should obviously, most of the time, be optimizing towards this one, campaign A, because that's clearly more effective. And so I've got a statistically significant data set there for the team to make a decision off of. So that then comes down to your cost. What are we paying as a cost per call? So let's just take an easy number and say it's a $10 cost per call. Well, for us to get that data point off of 100 calls, we needed to spend $1,000 just to understand if key term A or key term B is better. Now, in your average campaign for a decent to a large provider, you have at least 50 keywords that you're optimizing towards. So now we're talking about spending $1,000 just to determine which of 2 keywords is better. Now I've got 50 keywords in play, right? So again, same thing. Think about your data sets to make decisions. Let's say we get one call for each of those 50 keywords. Again, we're paying $10 a call. So we need to pay $500 just to get one call into every single keyword, which again doesn't tell us anything. There's just no statistical significance there. So at a really kind of guesstimate level, I wouldn't say even statistically significant, but a guesstimate level, we want to have at least 10 conversions before we start making optimization decisions. So again, we go back to our campaigns here and we got 50 keywords, $10 per call. I need to spend $500 just to get one conversion through each of those keywords, but I want 10. And so if I want to get 10 conversions through a particular keyword, I have to spend $500 per keyword, right? So now we're really starting to get up there. So we think if we got 50 keywords, I'm spending $500. That means I have to spend $25,000 just to get statistically significant information through each of my 50 keywords. If you're a smaller provider, you're not going to run 50 keywords. Like a good agency is going to narrow that down to 5 to 10 maybe that you'll focus on in the beginning. And that's why it's very, very important or helpful to work with a knowledgeable agency in your vertical or for your service lines, because they're going to know which keywords are like the top keywords to use and which ones it's smart for you to go after if you've got a limited budget. Same thing with larger budgets. So if you've got large budgets, you don't want people chasing a lot of keywords that are not relevant to your particular niche. And so experienced agencies are going to have data sets from other clients and have baseline best practices that they can start account builds with. And so very, very helpful to know that your money is not being wasted in that regard. But the main thing that you want to keep in mind is that there's a baseline cost, and that baseline cost is based on building statistical significance. Even for Google and Bing, they'll usually want anywhere between 15 and 30 conversions in a specific campaign before they'll even use machine learning in the algorithm to start making decisions on the account. So both your human team and the machine learning algorithms need certain levels of data. And again, that's for a specific campaign. So we don't just have keywords. We're optimizing keywords with ads. And then we're optimizing keywords with ads with landing pages. So I've got a keyword, and like on our end, we're always going to run a minimum of 4 split tests with different ads. So each keyword has 4 ads to it. So again, I got $10 cost per call. I have 4 ads, so I'm running $40 for that one keyword. That's not statistically significant. It doesn't tell me anything. So I need to run a minimum of $100 in terms of starting to get a sense of which ads are better. But then that connects to a landing page. And those landing pages should be specific. There should be alignment between search intent, the keywords you're using, the ads and the messaging in those ads, and then the messaging on the landing pages, as well as the graphic design and all those other features. So as we run these tests through these combinations, we need more and more data, which costs more and more money. So do you have enough money for it to make sense for you to run these campaigns? The last thing I would think about is let's take like some private pay clients in terms of like higher end service lines. So we have certain service lines for private pay clients that are getting a $7,000 cost per admission off of a Google Ads campaign. And you're like, wow, that's crazy, right? $7,000 is a lot of money, except these providers are making anywhere from $30,000 to $70,000 per patient because they provide very high-end white glove services. So a $7,000 cost per admission is acceptable in that regard. But then we want to think about from a math and a numbers standpoint. Let's say that we're spending $10,000 a month on Google Ads. Well, if our average cost per admission is $7,000, that means that at best, I'm going to get one potential admission that month off of that budget. Now, let's say that we spend $15,000 a month. So now we could potentially get 2 admissions off of that budget for this high-end provider. But let's say that our call team, for whatever reason, just fumbles an extra admission more than they usually do. So now my cost per admission for that month, where we got 2 really good qualified inquiries, but the team fumbled one, and so it wasn't an admission. So now it's a $15,000 cost per admission. That's crazy, right? Well, now let's say we spend $20,000. So now I can potentially get, close to 3 admissions there. So let's say again that my team fumbles one of those. And so the call team doesn't do a good job converting one, but I still got 2 admissions. Well, now the cost per admission is $10,000, right? So by getting a budget of $20,000, $5,000 more than the $15,000 budget, even if my team makes a mistake, I still have a significantly cheaper cost per admission than at the $15,000 total spend mark. So when you're thinking about your budgets, there's a certain value to having a high enough budget to meet your statistical significance, because that's going to have an effect on your probabilities in terms of what your overall cost per admissions can be. And you should always assume that there's going to be some human error in there. You're always going to assume that your team doesn't do a perfect job, right? Because no one does a perfect job every single month over month. So if we're getting 10 admissions a month and the team fumbles one of those, well, we still got 9 new patients in that particular month. That one isn't a huge loss. But if we only have enough budget to get 2 admissions a month, well, then that just had a fluctuation of 50% of total new admissions coming off of these campaigns, right? Pretty big swings in terms of what's going to be helpful or possible for us. So, obviously a lot of providers are using smaller budgets because they're not servicing these super high-end services or super high-end cash pay patients. But it's a good example because it gives you a sense of the math and how it works. Then you've also got the volume component to it. If you are tapping out your volume in a particular market, there's nowhere else to go either. So let's say that we are focused on teeth implants. So we want implants for broken tooth, root canals, whatever. How many searches are there per month for teeth implants in your geographic area? Maybe there's only 10. So we could spend $100, we could spend $10,000 on that keyword, tooth implant. We're still only going to get a total potential volume of 10 inquiries. And so we do want to think about the total market size, which in PPC world is search volume. What is the search volume for those terms? And then do we have to search for other terms? Because if we max out our tooth implant search volume, that means if we still want more patients coming in, we're going to have to find more patients from different service lines. So we're going to have to look for teeth whitening services, or we're going to have to look for tooth pain or filling a cavity, right? There are going to have to be other terms that we're going after just to be able to find more patient volume that matches the total search volume in a given market. Oh yeah, I just want to take a quick look at here at some basic data that will appear on the back end in Google Ads and Bing Ads accounts. And so you can ask your team for this data at any time. This one's a standard overview. So you can see here over the past 30 days, this account spent close to $300,000. And then we can look at the cost per conversion over time. We can look at the total number of conversions over time. So we can see that, we've got almost 9,000 conversions for this particular client. And what we want to look at here ideally is we can see that the red is going up while the spend stays largely consistent. So you can see kind of in January that conversion started to go up as spend went up. So obviously we would hope to see that's important. But then as spend leveled off, conversions continued to go up. And then of course, if spend stays the same and conversions are going up, cost per conversion should be going down. So most of the time, that's a really good metric to see, right? Of course, we want qualified inquiry volume, but for us, we set up all of our accounts so that we're only feeding qualified inquiry volume into the backend analytics. So all of those conversions are qualified conversions as far as this particular client is concerned. It's not all conversions. So qualified conversions going up, cost per conversion going down, good. They can pull this report really easily. And it's a good way for you as an executive just to get a real basic sense of what's moving, what's not moving. Are there any big spikes? Have you seen number of conversions go down while costs went up? Why is that happening? You can dig in and ask the team some questions about what's going on. They can also pull up all this data here related to particular key terms. And so this is for obviously a behavioral health provider. You can see the total conversions that came in. You can see, over $3.5 million in spend. What is the average conversion rate of the ads? What's the average conversion rate of the landing pages? What's the average cost per conversion? They can pull all this stuff. The only caution point I want to mention here is sometimes we'll get clients that will want to look at this data and they'll say, okay, well, look, dual diagnosis inpatient treatment is doing really well. We've got a really good cost per inquiry there. So why don't we just, quit spending on all those other terms and just focus on that term? And it goes back to that volume comment I just had. There's only so much volume in a given market. And so you can't just scale a particular key term to the moon. The other factor is that consumer preferences and behavior changes month over month, at least quarter over quarter. And so you'll see a key term that's doing really well suddenly just drop off or become more expensive. And so, you have to have a lot of different key terms running, because you always have to give the team and the algorithm ability to play with the accounts and optimize to different terms, to different ads, to different landing pages over time, because what worked yesterday doesn't always work tomorrow, right? Past performance does not necessarily indicate future performance. Sometimes, I'd say a lot of the time it will, but not always. And then again, you have that volume cap. There's only so much search volume in a given market. And so if, let's say, out of those 311 dual diagnosis and patient treatment calls, let's say that 10% of those converted to a patient. So you got 30-ish patients out of that. Well, if our client has 500 beds that they need to fill, 30 patients isn't going to do enough for them. So they need other key terms, need other marketing channels, et cetera, because that volume has to come from somewhere. And it's never going to come from a single key term. This is another kind of useful one that it's good for executives to be aware of. So you can look at your auction insights and see where your account appears versus competitors. And so are you getting more impression share than they are? Are you appearing in the top listings when you appear, or are you appearing, on your kind of bottom of the page listings? These are things that you want to know, because the team can have an impact on this. Most of it's cost driven. If you're willing to pay more, you're going to show up more. If you're willing to pay more, you're going to show up higher in the results rather than lower in the results. So Google actually has a lot of factors that go into play when they're doing an auction, but cost and what you're willing to pay is a pretty big one. So often if you want to show up more, you just have to pay more. Your team can work on optimizing the ads, optimizing the landing pages, optimizing their target key terms, and those will have positive impacts as well, but cost is probably a main driver. Helpful to know, right? It's not going to blow your mind in terms of changing results if you're ahead of your competitors all the time, because if you look at your Google ads, there's always, like 3 top spots. And so even if you're appearing 100% of the time, you still have 2 competitors appearing right next to you. And so it's helpful to kind of bully bid, is what we call it, to be willing to pay more than your competitors. So Google puts you at the top all the time, but it doesn't mean that you're going to beat out your competitors, because there's always at least 3, sometimes 4 ad slots that Google's selling to competitors at the same time. Okay, getting into tactics. So the first primary tactic for a PPC is high intent versus mid and low. When you're thinking about attracting and using PPC as a campaign channel for pulling in new patients, we want to think of what are people searching for when they want services now. PPC is a very high cost channel. You're going to pay more per admission from a direct kind of marketing spend standpoint than pretty much any other channel that you use. Even TV and radio are cheaper than PPC when you look at your total spend versus admissions lift most of the time. So for that reason, we don't want to be spending PPC budget on mid and low intent. For some businesses outside of healthcare, it can sometimes make sense because you push people to a more informational page, and then you can cookie tag them for retargeting, right? So your ads can follow them around the web, and you can do that for 90 to 180 days, and it's fairly cheap to do that. So it makes sense to send people to an informational page or an educational page and follow them around. For healthcare, because we have HIPAA compliance and privacy concerns, we don't want to do that. So we're just going to focus on the high intent terms. So you need to think about the psychology of your particular patients that you're trying to attract. What are they looking for? So let's take a dental patient, for example, looking for a teeth whitening service. So teeth whitening service is a great key term to be using as part of our campaigns, to create ads for, to create landing pages for, etc. Teeth whitening strip or just teeth whitening, maybe not so much. So teeth whitening strip is likely going to be an individual that's looking for a lower cost solution. Teeth whitening is probably someone that's just looking to have some questions answered. Let's think about if I'm a bariatric surgeon, someone that is looking for gastric sleeve or gastric bypass surgery, very high intent. Someone looking at weight loss, much less likely to be specific to the services that we're providing. Final example, someone looking for alcoholism treatment, is very high intent. Someone looking for alcoholism might just be a college kid researching an essay, so not as high intent. So we want to make sure that we understand the key terms for our particular target audience and that we're focused on those for PPC just due to the high cost of the platform. Everyone asks about optimizing for the algorithm, right? How do we get the algorithm working in our favor? There's really three main components. One is bidding. These are pay-to-play platforms. The more we pay, the more they're likely to show our ads. Whether you like it or not, that is a big component of how these platforms work. They are businesses. This is their business model. And so if you're willing to pay more, you're going to show up more. Ad quality, the way that your team creates the messaging that connects to the search intent, that also connects to the landing page that they're going to, that all factors into your quality rating. Google determines that in a lot of ways. It's time spent on the ad, it's the click-through rate, it's the click-through rate from the landing page to the inquiry, how much time spent on the page. All this stuff is stuff that Google factors in. Your team can affect that, right? So obviously you as the executive, the purse strings, you can pull the budgets, but your agency or your internal team has the ability to improve your quality rating scores through a various number of levers. And then the right data. Are we getting the right data into the algorithm? Because remember, both the machine learning algorithms and your team have to use good data. And so like if we had Salesforce sending admissions data, that's phenomenal. Most providers don't. So do we have qualified inquiry data that we're kicking back into the system? Hopefully, yes, right? If we don't have that, then we're just using conversion inquiry data. If we don't have call or inquiry data, then we're using click data. But the closer we get to the new patient admission, the better that the team, the algorithm is going to be able to optimize. And that's going to give us a lower cost and it's going to get us higher quality. We do want to think about lead quality versus cost, as we talked about a little bit before. Couple different ways that you can pull levers on quality and cost. One of them is what's called ad assets, at least in Google Ads. Bing has a different term for it, but it's similar. So ad assets, they used to be called extensions. If you've heard of ad extensions, they're now called ad assets. These are your lowest quality inquiries that you're going to get on the Google ad platform, because these are people that don't even go to the website. So like when you see on an ad, it says call now, that means that they're calling directly from the ad and they never even hit your website. Why are these the lowest quality? Well, some of it's bots and spam and stuff like that. Like that comes through Google Ads, to a certain degree. We can see as much as 20%, sometimes even 30% of calls off of ad extensions being spam or being bots. So that's problematic. But then on top of it, these are people that just don't care where they're going, right? They have no investment as you as an organization. They didn't choose you really for any particular reason. Maybe there was something in the ad that caught their eye, but they just clicked a call now button off of 50 character ad. Tells you that they're not overly invested in what's going on. So they're going to be your lowest quality calls. The more that people psychologically commit and the more time they've spent researching you, the higher intent that call is going to be. So if they've spent 30 seconds on your web page, that's going to be a higher intent than clicking an ad asset. Did they spend 2 minutes on your website and looked at a couple different pages? That's going to be higher intent still, right? So the more people are invested, the higher quality they will be. And so the more you use ad assets and extensions, the lower quality of the calls you're going to get, but they're a heck of a lot cheaper. So you're always going to pay more for higher quality inquiries, as we gave in that example of where we're having people jump through a bunch of hoops, right? We got a much higher quality inquiry, but we paid more for it. So I want to think about all of these options and tools in the same way. So maybe we run an analysis on our ad extensions and we find out that, only 1 in 10 are a qualified inquiry from an ad extension, but we're only paying $2 a call per ad extension, where we're paying $10 per call when they call off a click to the website. And so we run the numbers, what percentage are qualified inquiries, how are we converting those to actual new patients, and so does the math make sense? And oftentimes in our experience, we found that the math makes sense to keep the low quality calls coming in on top of the higher quality calls, because you just get more conversions at a cost effective standpoint based on how much you're paying for those clicks. as we add hoops to jump through, again, we're kind of bleeding people out. So if you look at e-commerce or if you look at form fills on healthcare websites, you lose anywhere from 10 to 30% of people per question asked. So let's say that I have a form fill and there's 3 questions I'm asking. I'm going to lose 30% of people after I ask for the name. I'm going to lose another 30% after I ask for contact information. I'm going to lose another 30% when I ask for insurance information. So each decision point, I'm having a drop off. E-commerce, you see the same thing, right? Add to cart, there's a certain level of drop off. Go to the checkout, there's a certain level of drop off, before people actually click place order. It just becomes a cost benefit analysis, a numbers game. If we're able to get people to take those actions that's cost effective for us, that makes sense, then we should do it. If the more volume at lower quality still gives us a better cost per new patient admission or new patient assessment or whatever our target metric is at the end of the day, then we should be including that campaign strategy and those channels and those campaign options into our accounts. I do want to also just kind of remind everyone that you optimize your ads and your landing pages separately, and they should be unique. So really good campaigns are going to have unique ads attached to specific keywords or ad groups that are all related. And so if I'm running teeth whitening service, that should be in a particular ad group that has ads connected to it that we're testing, because I don't want a teeth whitening ad showing up for someone searching for a dental implant, right? I don't want addiction treatment ad showing up for someone that's searching for our behavioral health, depression counseling services. So there's got to be alignment from keyword search or search intent to the ad, then to the landing page. So again, if I'm advertising teeth whitening and then I hit a landing page and it's just generic dental services and that page has all of our services listed on it, that is not as ideal as a unique landing page for that particular service. That also allows us to optimize better. So when we're running conversion rate optimization on ads, campaigns, or the landing pages, the more specific we are, the more likely we are to get meaningful results. It's really hard to optimize a generic page with 5 to 10 different services on it versus one page with a specific service line, because otherwise we don't know who we're optimizing towards. If we optimize a generic service page, maybe then we suddenly get more teeth whitening admissions, but we get less dental implant admissions because they're not working together. They're working at cross purposes. We don't want that. Another tactic when we think about Google Ads is what we call a broad match versus an exact match strategy. So Google allows you to say, hey, I only want to bid on exactly this search. So let's say teeth whitening service. Only when people put in those 3 words exactly like that are we going to show up. Google will charge you through the nose for that. They really want you to pay a lot of money because you're restricting the amount of people who are seeing it. There's usually a lot of competition for those ads, but it's an option. And some people like it because then you only get the exact kind of search you want. When you do broad match, let's say that we do a broad match for a teeth whitening service. Well, then Google might decide that teeth whitening strips are close enough, or just teeth whitening is close enough, or cleaner teeth is kind of related. And so the algorithm decides that, that's close enough. And so we're going to show up for those. So you're going to show up for things that are a little bit less valuable potentially, but Google's also using a lot of algorithmic data and conversion data on the back end to say like, hey, we've seen this work for other people that are advertising for these same terms. And so it makes sense. Also, they charge you a heck of a lot less for broad match targeting than they do for exact match targeting. So again, it comes down to that cost perspective. If I'm paying $60 a click for an exact match, but I'm only paying $2 a click for a broad match, and even 50% of my broad matches are unrelated, well, still, I'm still paying less than I was for the exact match term, even though I have to go through a bunch of clicks to get the right inquiry. With really good broad match, what you also want to do is you want to run what's called an extensive negative match list. So with broad match, you'll get like a lot of wrong number calls. So basically Google will say, okay, you're Dr. Dave, and across the street is Dr. Jenny. And so we know Dr. Jenny and Dr. Dave are the same services because we're Google and we know everything. And so when people search for Dr. Jenny, we're going to show them ads for Dr. Dave. Because that's the same services that they're looking for. That's really annoying to most providers. They get really frustrated by having all these wrong number calls, and that's part of what Google will do with your broad match. So you have to create a negative match list that says, okay, we don't want to show up for these terms. Or let's say you're a physical therapy provider, and so physical therapy services, but you keep getting calls for drug rehab because someone searched for rehab, right? And that Google says, okay, rehab is close enough to physical therapy. And so we're going to show up. And so you have to tell Google, like, well, no, we don't want to show up for alcohol. We don't want to show up for SUD. We don't want to show up for counseling services, right? We should be showing up for any of these rehabs that are not related to physical therapy, for example. On our end, we've got massive negative match lists that we use for different client verticals. And so we just take that negative match list and put it into our broad match campaigns. And so that's really effective because we get the really, really cheap broad match keyword targeting, and we're able to filter out all of the wrong numbers and the irrelevant searches that Google's kind of identifying. And so it kind of allows us to do like an exact match strategy in a certain sense with a broad match cost, which is a good way to think about things. Also, Google is pretty smart, and sometimes when you do exact match, there are certain keywords you weren't quite thinking about that did make sense, and so Google will include those in a broad match strategy. They're like, oh, great, we're showing up for these terms that we hadn't thought about, but that is, analogous enough that it makes sense for us to be targeting there. So there's a lot of advantages to broad match, but it doesn't always make sense depending on what your negative match lists are and how often people are optimizing the accounts. Like, if you don't have someone dedicated to your PPC account doing negative match list additions every single day, then you can end up wasting a lot of money. So different things to think about in terms of tactics. One last one I want to mention is brand protection. This can be both positive and negative. It can be defensive, which is good. That's why we call it brand protection. But it can also be negative if you're spending too much money on it. Sometimes when we take over an account, we'll see like 50% of the ad budget is going to brand searches. So let's say that you're Dr. Dave and they're spending 50% of the Google Ads budget on searches for Dr. Dave. Well, that's a terrible use of budget because these people were searching for Dr. Dave. They were going to go and click on Dr. Dave almost no matter what. They were just going to skip the ads, and then click on the organic listing and call Dr. Dave. So why do we want to pay Google for a click that we were going to get anyway? It's a waste of money. Why do agencies or internal marketing departments do that? Because it looks good, right? It's playing with the numbers. And so no one else is bidding on your name, or very few people are bidding on your name or Dr. Dave's name. And so they can get a really cheap cost per click. They can get a really cheap cost per call. And they'll say, hey, look, we had all these really cheap cost per inquiries. And lo and behold, most of these inquiries admitted into the program or they became new patients. Well, right, because they were calling you because they wanted to talk to you and partake in your services. That's why they call. That's why they search for you specifically. So it makes the marketing department or the marketing agency look really good when actually they're not. You were going to get those calls and those patients anyway. So you do want to run a little bit of brand protection, though. We usually recommend around 5% of the budget go to that because it is a bit of defense. So you do have competitors that are bidding on your name and trying to kind of encourage patients away, right? You looked for Dr. Dave, but Dr. Jenny's ad showed up. And so, they didn't pay too much attention. People really don't pay attention to the ads they click on. That's why you have such a large percentage of wrong numbers a lot of the time. And so I looked for Dr. Dave. I just assumed it was the first thing that popped up, called Dr. Jenny. And lo and behold, Dr. Jenny says, oh, hey, well, I know Dr. Dave does teeth whitening and we actually have a slot open at 2:00. Did you want to come in? She's like, oh, sure, that works, right? So then she gets the patient that was originally going to go to Dr. Dave. So you do want to protect against that a little bit. It's not a huge deal because most people that are looking for Dr. Dave are just going to hang up on Dr. Jenny and then call Dr. Dave. Like that will happen 95% of the time. So not a huge value there, but it is worth it to spend a little bit of money to protect the brand. All right, then getting to the psychology of people coming through your bottom of funnel or your PPC campaigns. So, mentioned targeting already. Remember, we can't retarget, so I have it on here, but not everyone knows that. So retargeting works off of cookie tracking. Cookie tracking is really, it's anonymous, and they do a really good job of hashing all the data on the back end, but there's still a risk. And so most of the platforms have decided to de-risk and they just don't allow retargeting for healthcare providers. And then there's a lot of liability on the healthcare side too. And so most healthcare providers don't want to risk it. So for this reason, both on the platform side and the healthcare provider side, retargeting is not an option. But how do we target? There's really two main ways in PPC. So when you get into Facebook and TikTok, there's tons of interest and demographics and all these different things you can use for targeting. In PPC, you don't have that breadth of availability. It's really location based. So you can target a radius. I can say, okay, here's the city, and I want to target just inside the city, or I want to target a 10-mile radius outside the city, or up to a 20-mile radius outside the city. You could also do zip code targeting. So we want to target certain zip codes. Maybe we're a higher income provider, and so we want to target high income zip codes. We can do that. Just be aware that Google is not great with this data. It's not super accurate. You'll have a lot of providers that will try to target a high income zip code, and then they'll still get a bunch of Medicaid calls. Google just isn't very good at being strict about their zip code targeting. Obviously, you have people that are moving around. You have people taking their laptops into cafes. You have people on their mobile phones, like in and out of different zip codes. Zip codes don't necessarily translate to income data all the time. Anyway, there's lots of different factors that go into it, but just be aware that the location targeting is okay, especially when you try and get into things like making zip codes a proxy for income. You can get third-party data. So we can pull in data from Experia, for example, and we can partner with them and then pull in their data, and that's going to be a little bit more accurate. But they're going to charge you 10% on top of what you're already paying Google, on top of what you're already paying your marketing team or your agency. So it gets pretty expensive. And it's the same thing. We found that data isn't overly accurate, at least not to the degree that it makes sense oftentimes to pay for the extra fees on top of everything else. So just keep it simple. You can do radius targeting. You can do zip code targeting. Target as much as makes sense for you in terms of the type of patient you're looking for, but just realize that it's not going to be even close to perfect. You can also do demographic targeting, ages, income levels. Those also aren't really great on Google. And again, part of the stuff that makes this so noisy is there's ad blockers and privacy blockers and incognito mode and people switching between devices. Like all of that stuff creates problems for any kind of accuracy in the demographic or the location targeting. And so you get a lot of noise sometimes. Bottom of funnel decision making is the most important thing to keep in mind when we're thinking about Google Ads. Again, it's what are the search terms that people are using to find your services that they want to use now. And again, there's a big difference between teeth whitening service and teeth whitening strip, alcoholism treatment and alcoholism, weight loss and gastric sleeve surgery, right? These are very, very large differences from a search intent standpoint. So think about the psychology of your potential patients and just ask them, talk to them and say, okay, well, what did you search for? What are you thinking about? Or what did you want? And those are really going to define your search terms. A comment on exclusions through messaging. So messaging, really good messaging attracts the right audience as well as repels the wrong audience. But then there's also this volume and this cost question that we talked about before. We'll have a lot of healthcare providers that aren't able to accept Medicaid say, well, can we do something so that we don't get Medicaid patients calling as much? And one answer is the hoops, right? So we can create a form fill on the website and we can take off the phone number. And people aren't allowed to call. They have to do a form fill. They have to put in insurance information, or they have to answer a question saying, are you on state insurance or not? But you lose so much volume through that it's usually not worth it. Like we've just tested it again and again and again. And we found that for larger providers that really want a lot of volume, it's better for them to take all the low quality inquiries that they can't accept into the program just to find the decent number of qualified. They lose too many qualified because of that drop-off percentage. Every time you ask a question, you're losing 30%, and that's 30% of both unqualified and qualified. So do you really want to lose that volume? The answer is usually no. The same thing happens with messaging. Let's say that you say Medicaid not accepted in your ad campaigns, Or you say something like only private pay accepted or only commercial insurance accepted, you will also lose volume in our experience with our data sets. For some reason, maybe it's because people don't like to see healthcare providers excluding people. Maybe it's because people don't really understand insurance that well. And so if they see there's no something or something only is accepted, that they think it doesn't apply to them. So they have a better chance with another provider. Whatever the reason is, including that exclusionary messaging in your ad campaigns generally loses more volume and loses more qualified volume than would be gained in the cost savings from having less unqualified calls come in. So it's always worth testing. Just because we've gotten poor results with it consistently doesn't mean that you're going to get poor results. But in our experience with $3 billion worth of data, we have not seen that be an effective strategy. Even when we're thinking about people calling in, the psychology is immediate needs or crisis needs. So if I'm calling a behavioral health provider, I'm usually in some kind of crisis, right? I'm not calling, especially if it's like a higher level of care. I'm not calling a residential treatment provider because I'm just feeling a little upset today, right? I'm calling a residential treatment provider because I had a mental breakdown, I had a panic attack, I got into a car accident, after drinking. Something like that is going to make me want to come in. Same thing with like going in for a root canal, right? That's a crisis call. That's an immediate need as a dental provider. If I'm a bariatric surgeon, I'm probably not getting crisis calls, right? There aren't likely to be immediate needs here. So it depends on the service line that you're offering, but we want to think through what that conversation entails and what that search intent is to make sure we're showing up for the right terms. And then that also affects the way that we train our call teams to handle the different conversations that are coming in. So with a crisis call, it's a little bit more transactional. So I'll just give a personal example. About 2 years ago, I was looking for a root canal. I was in a lot of pain. I didn't care where I went as long as they could provide me, service as fast as possible. So all I did was just call down the line and say, hey, do you have availability today? Do you have availability today? And the answer was yes or no. And I'd call like 7 providers until I found someone that had availability that day for me to go in. So there's 2 things there. Is one, thinking through that messaging, right? What was I looking for? I was looking for, root canal treatment or tooth pain treatment. But then also the conversion rate depending on availability. And so it didn't matter how good the person was on the phone. It mattered if there was availability or not. And so if that provider didn't have availability for 3 days, 7 days, 2 weeks, which is not uncommon for dental providers, then they were losing all those patients. Like they lost me because they weren't able to fit them into the schedule. So we want to take those factors into account when we're training our call teams, but also when we're evaluating our call teams to see what their conversion rates are for qualified to admission. And then the other part of it is that consideration compare phase. So all I needed was immediate access. And we see that a lot for crisis services. If you're looking for urgent care, if you're looking for a high acuity addiction to behavioral health treatment, if you're looking for tooth pain, these are things that people want an immediate solution for. And so there's a transactional conversation on the phone. Now, take that and move that to someone looking for gastric sleeve surgery. They're probably going to call 4 or 5 different providers and look for the one that's best for them because they don't need it today. They don't need it tomorrow. This is a big decision for them. It's probably going to cost them a lot of money. You'll see the same thing with teeth whitening service, right? Do they need the teeth whitening service tomorrow? No, they can wait. So they're going to call and they're going to evaluate different people. So if your team is trained to take tooth pain calls that are transactional, and then you start marketing for teeth whitening service calls, well, it's no longer a conversation of, hey, we have space, do you want to come in? It's a conversation of like why you are the best provider to go for teeth whitening services versus your competitor across the street. Very different conversation that the team has to have. And so as you expand your marketing services in terms of what you're targeting or the campaign channels that you're using, right? So if we get into Facebook, if we get into TV, the people that call us off of those channels are often not in immediate crisis. They're comparing and contrasting different providers in the area. And so very different conversations to be having. that creates a tiered cost in terms of what's happening from a marketing standpoint. So my root canals, because those are kind of high dollar values potentially, we might pay a lot more for those when we're bidding against them from a PPC strategy. Teeth whitening service is probably not worth as much, and so we're not going to have to bid as high. And so maybe it makes sense for us to go for a volume play with teeth whitening services because we get a lower cost that offsets the lower margin that we make on it. So when we think about marketing strategy, we're thinking of what that tiered cost is and then how that contributes to value for the overall organization. But it also relates to that call team training component. So we might say, okay, look, we're running PPC campaigns for root canals or tooth pain, and those are working really well. And then we expanded to teeth whitening services, and now it doesn't work for us. And now we're not getting any new patients in for that. And the reason might be because the call team doesn't know how to handle that conversation. They're used to the transactional conversation. They're not used to selling the services and highlighting how you're different or better than your competitor. And so that happens a lot of the time when we expand marketing channels as well, or even in the PPC world. So let's forget that we're expanding a radius. So if we got a 10-mile radius around us, patients are willing to travel 10 miles for most healthcare services. But let's say that you then expand to 20 miles. Well, that's kind of a little bit of a distance to travel. So why am I going to make the extra 10-mile drive when I've got so many providers in my area? Your person on the phone has to give them a really strong reason to choose you and drive that extra distance. So the people that are in that 10 to 20 mile radius ring are much harder to convert than the people that were just in the 10-mile radius. So same thing happens as we go 20 to 30 miles out. Those are going to be even harder to convert because now I have to pull them from farther away. But the cost still might make sense. Let's say that the 10-mile radius has the cheapest cost per conversion. But as I get to the 10 to 20 mile radius, it's costing me, let's say, 20% more from a PPC standpoint to get those people to come in because it's just harder. I'm converting less of them. So maybe I'm getting the same number of total inquiries as I expand out a radius. But for obvious reasons, just human psychology, they don't want to drive as far. They want to find someone that's closer. So your call team's not able to convert as many of those. So we'll often see once every service line is different, but once you get out of a certain radius for what's normal for what people are willing to travel for a particular service, we'll see as much as a 300% drop in the number of conversions. It's 3 times harder to get someone to drive from farther outside the normal radius than what your kind of core distances that they're willing to travel. So that means that you're going to have a 3 times higher cost. But that 3 times higher cost might actually still be profitable. So I want to get let's say we can get 10 patients a month from our core radius of 10 miles. And then we can get another 10 patients from the 10 to 20 mile radius. We have to spend a lot more to get them. But because it's still profitable, it's okay. Now, if we go out to the 20 to 30 mile radius, we find that actually it's too hard to get people in. We're spending more money than we actually are getting in terms of a return when they come in for services. So it doesn't make sense. But why is this really important to think about? Because it means you can't necessarily run aggregate data numbers all the time. You have to understand your core metrics in this sense. So if I'm getting, let's say, $100 cost per admission off of my core 10-mile radius, but I'm getting a $300 cost per admission off of my 10 to 20 mile radius. Well, now my average cost per admission is $200. And we might look at the data as executives and say, oh, well, our cost per admission just doubled. What's going on here? You guys are screwing up the PPC campaigns. Well, the answer might be we can only get 10 patients a month off of PPC in our 10-mile radius because that's all the search volume there is. There's no one else searching for services that we're providing in that 10-mile radius. So that's our cap for a particular market. So now if we expand it out to 20 miles, now we're paying 3 times as much, but we're getting 20 patients a month. And so maybe I make a 30% margin on my 10-mile radius patients, And maybe I'm only making a 10% margin on my 10 to 20 mile radius expansions, but I'm still making a 10% margin, right? So that volume is still profitable for us. So that's how we want to think about our marketing in terms of the cost benefit analysis, because it changes based on the volume of patients that we're bringing in, and different tiers are going to have different costs. But as long as those costs are profitable, it's okay. Now, where this also might be problematic is, let's say you have an agency comes in that doesn't understand your service line dynamics, and they start running a 30-mile targeting radius on your PPC campaigns. And so you find that your PPC campaigns are completely unprofitable. And so you'll say, oh, well, geez, PPC doesn't work for us. Wrong. The agency or the department and your team just didn't really understand your particular service line dynamics, and they were running too large of a radius. And so your aggregate cost per admission looked too high, whereas if they had been running the right campaigns, it would have been more effective. So these are all things that you got to be thinking about as you put your PPC strategy into place, and also thinking through the psychology of your users and how that affects team training, where they are, the distance they're at, the search terms they're coming off of. All of it has an impact on ultimate success. All right, so we went through search volume already. Just again, remember it's capped. You cannot scale PPC campaigns to the moon. There's only so much search volume for a particular term. There's only so much search volume in a particular geographic area. And so you're going to get a limited amount of total patient volume from a PPC strategy, no matter what you do. You can spend $100, you can spend $10,000. If you've tapped out the search volume, you've tapped out the search volume. Really important with PPC is you're not optimizing for keywords that people click on. Obviously, that's part of the thought process. But if you remember one of the first trainings that we did in this course, we looked at the sea of sameness and how you had these PPC campaigns where they all look the same. You couldn't tell one provider from another. That's very, very hard to run successful PPC campaigns that way, because all you're getting is people that are shrugging their shoulders and clicking. They're going, oh, well, they're all the same. I might as well click and call this one. It's not a lot of commitment there. Whereas if you've got a differentiated ad that focuses on what your strengths are, or what you do better, or what you do differently, then the person that clicks on that is much, again, psychologically, they're much more interested in you than the other 3 ads that they showed on the screen. And so if that matches the landing page, then they're again more committed to you. And so they're much more likely to convert. And so that's how marketing can have a stronger impact on your overall lead quality and the intent of the person coming in, if there's a clear match. If they're just going off of keywords, you might get the wrong data in, right? So maybe we find that high end or premier is something that people like to click on. But if everyone says premier in their ads, then there's zero value to us as a provider, because people are just shrugging their shoulders and clicking on any one of the 4 ads. We want them to click on us because they know they're going to get something different with us. And so even if we use the word premier, we need to still include our differentiators and what is premier about us versus our competitors. So we always got to make sure we stand out from the crowd. The most successful PPC campaigns that we run always have client differentiators as a significant component of the success. Budgeting. How do we think about budgeting? PPC can be really expensive. And so it can be an outsized portion of the budget because of that expense. And again, executives tend to like it because it's click, call, admission. It's very visible. It's very easy to grasp. It's very short term. And so we don't have to think too strategically about it. It's something that a lot of us like about that component. But that cost is a limiting factor. So if we're paying $500 in admission, but we only make $550 from the particular service that we're providing, that's not very attractive for us. So then how do we think about PPC campaigns as part of the overall budget strategy? One is new locations. We use a lot of PPC for scaling providers. So whether we've got a private equity partner sponsor for one of our clients, or it's just a strategic client that's looking to grow and scale, when they open a new location, nobody knows who they are. If they've maybe moved not too far geographically, there might be some kind of brand stretch where there's some awareness. But most of the time, nobody knows who the new provider is. They've never heard of them before. And so you're just not going to open up and suddenly get patients in a new market where nobody knows you or what you do. Or even if they start to get a sense of what you do, there's already established providers in the community that they're used to going to. Why are they going to switch and go to you? Very, very hard to get people in the door. So PPC is a great place to start because PPC taps into the Google volume. If people are searching on Google for teeth whitening service, gastric sleeve surgery, counseling for depression, that means that they don't know where to go. So you're automatically being funneled to people that don't have an established provider already. So that's great. So you get in front of people that are actually likely to choose a new provider over someone else who you're trying to steal away from an old provider. Like that's much harder to do. So new locations are great. Now it's going to cost you through the nose, and you have to pay a lot of money in the beginning, but the way that you want to think about that is it's fine because you're building downline value with the PPC campaigns. Let's say that we break even, that we make no money on the patients, like our marketing cost actually offsets any income that we might make from it. That's okay because what we're doing is we're building a reputation. So we get people in the door, we provide good service. They then go into the community, provide good word of mouth. If we do our jobs well, they'll ideally be providing some online positive Google reviews. And so that allows us to get a foothold and grow, even if we're breaking even, or even if there's a slight cost to it. If we build that into our runway within the pro forma, then we're able to manage those costs appropriately and become successful in the future. Right? We're setting ourselves up for success by investing heavily in new locations. So new locations is a good way to start. A lot of our providers across service lines will try to fill 50% of the available capacity with PPC for up to the first 6 months. Sometimes we'll start really high and do like a 10% budget reduction month over month. Sometimes we just build it into the pro forma for the new location. We say, hey, here's how much we're committing to try and get new patients in the door at X target cost. And we'll just spend that for 6 months. And then hopefully that flywheel starts turning as we deliver good service, that word of mouth grows, the costs come down because we get good Google reviews, et cetera, et cetera. Should comment on the fact that Google reviews does have a very large impact on PPC strategy. So what we'll see across service lines is that if the Google review scores fall below 4, especially for a higher end provider like that's only doing commercial insurance, Medicaid can be a little bit tougher. But if you're doing commercial insurance or private pay, if you have a Google review score under 4, you'll see at least a 20% higher cost per inquiry, which then means a 20% higher cost per new patient. Because people look at the review scores. Even if they're running a Google ad, they'll do some research and they'll click the ad, they'll keep that tab open, but they'll open up another tab, do a review search and say, okay, these people have a review score under 4. I'm not even going to call them. So very big impact. So when we open a new location, we start to get positive Google review scores. That's actually going to improve our overall cost per qualified inquiries, so that we're having to spend less on marketing. Short-term support is great for Google. Google can move up and down. Bing can move up and down very easily that you can't do with other channels. And because it's all bottom of funnel, final decision-making stage, it can have a pretty immediate impact. Now, you can't just double your Google budget or cut it in half week over week. Like that messes everything up because, again, it's all about data and the amount of data being pushed through the system. And so both for your human team and for the algorithm, if you throw too much of a data wrench in there, it's not going to work well. So generally what we want to see is a 10% increase or decrease week over week. And that's usually manageable for both the internal team and for Google to not make a mess of everything or really mess up the data sets. We'll have a lot of clients that for whatever reason, they want to significantly increase volume. And so they'll say, well, let's just double the budget for the next 2 weeks. Never works. All Google does is just spends your money. Pushes it into low intent key terms because there's not enough volume in the high intent key terms. It just charges you more for what you're already getting because it doesn't know what to do with it, and the algorithm can't update that fast. So what happens is you just end up wasting a lot of money. Really think about a 10% increase or decrease week over week, and that's the best way to really move your budgets. Keep it consistent most of the time. So short-term support is great. We just want a little bit of extra volume. We can add that 10% week over week. Steady stream of new patients. So there's always that downline value component. So remember, even if we're breaking even on a PPC spend, we're going to get referrals from old patients. We're going to get positive reviews from old patients. We're going to get readmissions or reutilization of services from old patients. All of these things have value. And so even if, again, we broke even on that initial new patient, we're still going to get some downline. And so as long as we're not too far over our skis in terms of cost per admission versus total income for initial visits or initial services, we want to be having PPC as part of our budget. Now, for a lot of providers that don't have a new location, right? So as we said, for a new location, up to 50% of admissions, whatever that budget ends up being in terms of overall cost per admission, like that's not uncommon for a new location. For an existing location, for an established provider, we generally want to keep our PPC new patients under 10% of the total volume of patients for a provider. So if a provider is seeing 100 patients a month, we only want 10 coming from PPC on average because of the cost. We can get patients in much more cheaply and cost effectively from other channels, from your Facebooks, from your TikToks, from your one-on-one boots on the ground outreach, even from TV campaigns. Over time, they're much more cost effective than PPC campaigns. So PPC campaigns have their value. There's a certain volume there that we do want to capture, but we don't want to be overly dependent on it. Last thing that we'll cover for PPC is just a basic FAQ, like we've done with all of our channel strategies and components. So really common questions that I get asked when we're working with clients: why don't I see our ad when searching? Lots of reasons that can happen, but if you remember that graph we showed about impression share, it's about bidding. How much money are we paying? Because we pay every time we show up. We pay every time someone clicks on an ad. And so if we're not paying a lot of money, we're not going to show up every single search. If our competitors are paying more from us, or paying more than us, then they're beating us out in some of the auctions. And so we're not going to show up. We might be optimizing towards a different campaign. So maybe we find that teeth whitening services is super cost effective, whereas root canal is really expensive and we don't have a big budget. So we're optimizing the campaigns for teeth whitening services, not for root canal. And you did root canal for your search, but we're only showing up for that twice a day, where we're showing up for teeth whitening services 20 times a day. Lots of reasons you might not show up in a particular ad. Also, ad results are very individualized. So let's say that Google knows that I live in Indianapolis. And so if I search for teeth whitening services California, it actually won't show me any ads most of the time. It doesn't show me ads because it knows that I'm living and I'm currently in Indianapolis. And so it's not going to waste their clients, which is your money, for a potential patient who's not actually going to come in. So Google actually does a huge favor in that regard, where it tries not to show ads to people that are unlikely to utilize those services. So that's another reason. If you're too far away, if you're outside the city, even if you search for that city name, Google knows you're not there and is much less likely to show you any ads, much less ads for your organization based on geographic distance. Why aren't our ads converting to new patients? Obviously, super important question. Always, again, be careful here. Your marketing is not driving admissions, new patients. It is driving qualified inquiries. So if your qualified inquiries aren't converting to new patients, then you should obviously be looking at your call team and seeing what's going on, or looking at your scheduling. Are there enough available slots when people call for them to come in? There can be different factors there. Now, your marketing team is required or accountable for your qualified inquiries. And so if qualified inquiry cost is rising or you don't have enough coming in, then you need to be talking to your team about that. Now, again, from a PPC standpoint, are you targeting the right people? Do you have the right keywords in there? Are we optimizing the ads? Are we optimizing the landing pages? Those are really the metrics that we're looking at. And then again, remember, there is that target component. So there's only going to be a certain volume coming in, and maybe we're targeting a 10-mile radius. And then the team said, okay, executives want more admissions. There are no more in our 10-mile radius, so we're going to expand to a 20-mile radius. and we find that we get a 3 times higher cost per new patient admission, even though cost per inquiry is remaining fairly stable. And that all depends on the messaging and the targeting. Like if we don't have the location in the ad and you don't have the location on the landing page, the patient doesn't know until they call. Whereas if we have the location in the ad or the location in the landing page, then the patient might decide not to call because they know it's too far away, and that's going to drive up your cost per qualified inquiry the farther you expand your radius. So lots of factors that go into it. Very important question to be asking, but just making sure that you understand the different nuances that can occur and that your team can give you the reasons for it, right? If you go and ask your team, why is our cost per qualified inquiry higher? They need to be able to tell you those factors, right? That's not something that you should have to try to troubleshoot yourself. Like they should know that, and that helps you determine if you've got a good team or a good agency or not. We need more patients. Can we spend more? Really important question. So for PPC is one of the only channels where you can actually spend more and get more in the short term, right? No other marketing channels work that way, but PPC does. And you just want to think about that incremental increase. So we can't just double our budgets because that screws up the optimizations, it screws up the data sets. But a 10% increase week over week is solid. And so you can plan for that if you're trying to increase volume in a given month or a short-term window. Why are we getting so much spam or so many wrong numbers? We talked about. So people are just not that bright on internet searches. They just aren't. And so a lot of people just click anything that appears first on their screen. And so you'll get a lot of wrong numbers. You'll get a lot of people looking for the wrong thing. Some of that can be managed by your team. They can restrict the match type. They can get more clear on the language. There's different factors that they can put into play. But most of the time, people are just going to make wrong clicks on Google ads and Bing ads a lot of the time. So it's just part of it. We are just going to accept the fact that 10 to 20% of our call volume off of these campaigns is going to be less than, not even less than ideal. It's going to be completely outside the realm of what we would be able to take or convert. And that's just how it is. But from the cost standpoint, if it makes sense, it makes sense. If we're paying our cost per qualified inquiry is the right cost, even though we have to filter through 3 spam calls, fine. We just want to look at the final cost more than we want to look at is spam coming through or not, are wrong numbers coming through or not. So make sure that the team has an answer for you. Are they updating their neg match list on a regular basis? Are they aware of what they can do from a messaging standpoint? But at some point, we just have to accept the fact that this channel drives a certain volume of unqualified calls. Can we screen out Medicaid callers or target specific insurances? Pretty much no. As we talked about, if you try to screen out Medicaid in your messaging, you lose a lot of qualified inquiry volume in addition to screening out the Medicaid. It just seems to be the fact. You guys are welcome to test it for yourself, but we've found it again and again and again as we've had many, many clients ask us that over the years. You cannot target specific insurances. There is a very, very tiny amount of volume for certain insurance, but most people don't. I mean, think about it. Have you ever searched for cavity for Guardian Dental, right? Like there actually is a couple searches a month, like across the entire country for stuff like that. But there is not a high volume to any real degree. So it's not a valuable target because there's no volume for it. You can spend $100 a month targeting certain insurance searches for your service line, but that's about the market cap. So there's not a lot of opportunity there. What's a good target cost per qualified inquiry is obviously a fabulous question, and that completely depends on your service line. It depends on the payments that you accept. Even for a provider that takes commercial insurance, let's say that BCBS is 60% of their market for their state, but BCBS reimburses really poorly, and so they're not in network with the BCBS. Well, that means that 60% of your calls you can't take because that's 60% of your market. 60% of people are BCBS, and you do not take their insurance. That is going to drive up your cost per new patient and potentially your cost per qualified inquiry because you're not able to accept a pretty large segment of the market. So costs for qualified inquiries are variable, but you should be able to build a benchmark. Either you're working with an agency like us that knows the space already and has benchmarks for a lot of it. I mean, benchmarks do change on service line. They do change based on insurances you can take. They do change based on geography. So they're not stable across the country, but you can kind of set certain baselines, or you need to build your own. Like, what are we seeing historically? Are there ways that we can improve that cost? Yes or no? How can we do it? But always keep in mind that tiered aspect too. As we get to new markets, as we get to new channels, as we try to grow volume, that is going to affect our aggregate costs and potentially and often usually affects them in a negative way. It gets more expensive. But as long as our total gross volume is profitable, then we want to keep expanding in that direction. Last question is, how many staff do I need to run PPC? Oftentimes we'll go in and we'll find a provider that has a PPC specialist that they've hired. This is almost never the right answer. So if you're really small, let's say you're running a $10,000 a month budget, there is nothing for that PPC specialist to do for 40 hours a week. A $10,000 a month budget, remember, you're not even getting enough data through the system in a given week to be statistically significant. And so that PPC specialist can't even make weekly updates because there's not enough statistically valid data to make an optimization off of them. So if you're small, you're just gonna have a PPC specialist twiddling their thumbs. On the large side, I mean, the more money you're spending, so let's say we're spending $1 million a month. $1 million a month, we need to be updating campaigns daily and usually multiple times a day, including neg match lists, including overall optimizations. And so then you need multiple staff members. But remember, PPC is not just PPC. PPC specialists are usually really good at data analytics and really good at understanding the platform and optimizing campaigns. They're not great ad copywriters. They don't have any graphic design experience. They don't have web development experience. And so really for just a base level PPC campaign, we need 4 full-time staff members. We need the PPC specialist, we need a graphic designer, we need a web developer, and we need a content copywriter for ads specifically, because an ad copywriter is a separate skill set from someone who writes a blog. So we need 4 full-time staff just for a simple campaign. And then as we scale those campaigns up, we need multiple people on the team to make sure that they can pop in, a couple times a day, updating all the different components of the campaign. So that's why you'll see that agencies often have a scaling spend, right? The more you're spending, the more you're going to see the charges go up. So it's usually like a fixed cost of 15% of ad spend because you have to add more staff. We need more graphics. We need more split tests. Like when we're spending $1 million a month, we're running a ton of split tests with landing pages, a ton of split tests with ads. And so I need multiple copywriters, I need multiple graphic designers, I need multiple web developers on those campaigns so that we can be running all these tests at the same time to make sure that the campaigns stay optimized and stay effective. And it just often, there's just no way that one PPC person is going to be able to do that, whether it's a small provider or a large provider. So when should I expect results? PPC is quite unique in the sense that you can start to see results fairly quickly. Starting a new campaign, we'll start to see clicks come in often day one. And then in terms of how quickly new inquiries are going to come in, that's going to depend on your budget. So again, if our average cost per call is $10, we're not going to see any results until we spend at least $10. If our average cost per call or inquiry is $100, then we're not going to see any results until we spend at least $100. So it does obviously depend on budget. It then depends on search volume. Is anyone searching for teeth whitening services today? Is anyone searching for gastric bypass surgery today? Search volume is obviously a factor in terms of whether or not we're going to see results. And then, of course, we have to go back to what we talked about in terms of really pushing data and volume through the campaigns. So if we need $100 on average to get an inquiry, well, we've got 50 key terms in there. We are spending money across those key terms as people start to search, and then we are running combinations. So we're split testing 4 to 5 ads per ad group. We're split testing different landing pages per ad group. And so we need at least $100 to go through a particular combination for us to start to see if that's going to work. And of course, are we going to get a call every time we spend $100 in the right combination? Of course not. It doesn't work every time. There's a lot of variability that happens based on search, based on individual psychology, based on the ads that are being shown, et cetera, et cetera. So we might need to see $300 go through a particular keyword ad landing page combination. And if we don't see any calls coming in after we spend $300, we would expect it hopefully, around 2 to 3 calls. Then we're going to say, okay, maybe we'll shut that particular group down and push money into the other combinations. So as we push money through the system, we're getting data back in terms of, are people calling off of these combinations? Are they not calling off of these combinations? And so again, depending on budget, we might see inquiries coming in as soon as day one, or if we're only spending $10 a day and it takes us at least $100 to usually get an inquiry, then we're probably only going to see 1 call a month coming in, right? It doesn't make sense. So the budget has to be proportionate to what the standard inquiry volume is. And then there has to be enough data, especially for new campaigns, to push that money through to start getting the volume back. And then, of course, obviously, inquiries don't translate necessarily to new patients. We have to know what our average conversion rate is. We have to know what the number of qualified inquiries we're getting is. So how much does it cost us to get a qualified inquiry? And then what is our conversion rate for those inquiries? Do we have scheduling availability? Is the team doing a good job? All these questions are going to be factors in terms of the results that you're getting. But bottom line is that for PPC, you can expect results, assuming that you've got the right budget in there going on a per day basis, to be fairly quick. And the last, of course, caveat there that I've mentioned a couple times, and you'll hear me keep mentioning, is that PPC should not be your expectation for how fast you're getting results across other channels. A lot of small businesses start with PPC. A lot of organizations are heavily reliant on PPC because it's the easiest to see from a final attribution metric. And so they get this false idea that PPC is how marketing works in general, and that's not the case. Obviously, PPC is all about final attribution because these are people that are searching for your services right now. That's why they went on to Google. That's what they are looking for. And so we're going to be able to see them take action because they're at that final decision-making stage of the process. When you are marketing on all of your other channels, no one's going on Facebook and then seeing an ad and saying, oh yeah, I totally forgot I wanted to buy a new car today. Or I totally forgot I wanted to schedule that orthopedic surgery, right? That can happen once in a blue moon, but that's not how Facebook or TikTok or radio or television or billboards work. So we never want to assume that the quick result sets that we're seeing with PPC are in any way translatable to other platforms, and we shouldn't be setting expectations there. Also, again, just keep in mind, you're going to get a lot of Medicaid. And so if you are a Medicaid provider, that's fabulous. PPC is a really, really good place for you to be. And it's actually often a stronger place for you to be even than search engine optimization or other channels sometimes, because a lot of people on Medicaid are more likely to click on an ad than the commercial population. And it's just psychology. So someone with commercial or that's going to do private pay, they often want to skip the ads. They don't like the ads. They're going to go to the organic search results. Whereas someone on Medicaid is a little less choosy more often than not. And one of the reasons they're less choosy is that it's very hard for them to find a provider. So we know from the insurance data that most people looking for services, whether it's physical health or mental health, are more likely to be on Medicaid. They just have higher healthcare needs than the average person using commercial insurance or private pay. So you have a higher volume of Medicaid searchers in general. And then on top of that, they can't find a place to go because not enough people take Medicaid. And so one Medicaid searcher might call 10 to 20 different providers because they're trying to find somewhere to go. Whereas someone on commercial insurance might only have to call 2 to 3 providers before they find somewhere that they want to go or that they can go. And so not only do we have a higher volume of total searchers being on Medicaid, we also have that higher volume of people calling a lot more places. And again, they're just less discerning in terms of ads versus organic results. So your Medicaid population is always going to be almost a 9 out of 10 ratio. You'll generally get 9 Medicaid calls for every 1 commercial call you get across various service lines. So that's important to keep in mind. So that's our overview of PPC. Hopefully you find that helpful. And then obviously you're starting to ask here, what results should we be expecting with other channels and how do we evaluate those, which is what we'll get into in subsequent trainings.